Hello and welcome once again to Minds That Matter. I'm your host, James Thomas. And I just want to welcome you all and wish you a very happy new year for 2011. We have a very special guest today. His name is Craig Brando, and he is a case manager for our Housing First program. In fact, you have been the case manager since the inception of the Housing First program. Is that not in fact correct?
I don't
Pretty close to the beginning?
Pretty close, yeah.
Yeah, well, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
I just want to let folks know that the reason we have Craig here today is that his mother had bipolar disorder, and we've had some conversations about what it was like to grow up with a person who was mentally ill. And now he's working in the field of working with folks that are homeless, many of whom have mental illness. So we wanted to have Craig come on and talk about his story. This is actually going to be a two-part show. We're going to have two episodes of this show, and we'll take it from there. But thank you very much for coming.
Again, my pleasure.
So would you like to start with just what was it like growing up with a mother who had bipolar disorder?
Well, to say the least, very difficult. You know, I watched my mother suffer, and very, very painful to witness that.
Now, how did the disorder manifest itself? I mean, what kind of, as you know, we talk about symptoms, we talk about the kinds of issues that people have. What were some of her issues that you can remember from growing up?
Well, I can only generally point to the first stressor, which I know surrounded my father and my brother's mother. I believe that there was some conflict there. We were living in Los Angeles at the time, and she became very depressed. And as a result of that, you know, she made the decision to come back here to Rhode Island. I was probably about the early age of 6 when she made that decision.
Can you describe what the stressor was? I mean, what happened that caused her to?
Well, my father, Marlon Brando, I have to kind of back up a little bit, you know, and kind of go from the beginning here. My mother worked for the New York Times in Los Angeles for a period of time, and ultimately became governess for my brother Christian Devi Brando, which is how my parents met. And Marlon's ex-wife, Anna Kashfi, let me just say that there was a lot of arguing going on. You know, they had separated, and Christian was in the middle of that. There was a custody, you know, battle, so on and so forth. I don't believe that, you know, Anna, my mother worked directly for Anna, and I don't believe that Anna was quite aware of my existence or who I was. Let me put it that way, that I was actually Marlon's son. And I think that once she got that news, that was kind of the conflict accelerated between the three of them, which propelled her into a depression. That's, you know, from the years when I've tried to speak with my mom with regard to the reasons for our leaving Los Angeles, it was like flipping a switch off. There was, she would become a very, very flat effect, and after a while actually stopped trying to pry her for that information because I was afraid it would you know, was affecting her in a very negative way. So
was that sort of, we use the term sometimes, a trigger? Was that relationship a trigger for her symptoms to be increased? And with bipolar disorder, she would have a tendency to become more depressed than maybe what we would call high or manic. Was that what was happening? Was she became depressed around this relationship?
Very, very much so. In fact, my earliest memories of her illness was that you know, she was very, very depressed. I really didn't start seeing any mania until we were in Rhode Island for about a year after leaving Los Angeles, and there was communication back and forth between my mother and my father, and Christian as well. He would call on occasion, and he wanted to come out and be with us, but my mother was too well, and my father wouldn't hear of it. So ultimately, and very unfortunately, my father cut off all communication with my mother, and also prohibited Christian from speaking with us, any further. And that decision just spiraled her. Terrible, terrible thing to watch.
Was she involved in any treatment here in Rhode Island? Do you remember her taking any medications or seeing a doctor or anything of that nature?
I don't recall exactly the doctors, that she saw around that time. Later on, she would come to see psychiatrists and psychologists, so on and so forth. She was certainly institutionalized on a couple of occasions, Butler Hospital, and one occasion, I believe, was Eleanor Slater.
Mm-hmm.
She spent a period of time there.
Okay. Yeah. So in the midst of that, where would you go if your mother was hospitalized? Who was tending to you?
Well, we were, again, my mother came here, again, to Rhode Island for support, which, the support that she got was minimal, at best, but we were living on the first floor of my grandmother's home, and my grandmother occupied the second floor. So in the event that she would go to the hospital or something of the sort, then usually I would sleep downstairs, but the majority of the day I would spend with my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Which, go ahead.
How was your development during this time? We had talked prior to the show that you said that there were periods of kind of rebelliousness or detachment from what sort of normal development because of your mother's life, or your reaction to your mother's life, things of that nature.
If I can describe my mother's illness using an analogy, like it was a lake, and we were out in the middle of that lake, and we were not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
We were trying to survive. And on the outer edges of that lake were the people, my family that was supposed to be responsible, and they weren't. There was enough wealth in the family, certainly, that they could have sent her to the best hospitals in the world 10 times over, and that would never come. But more so, just love and compassion, as we all know, is healing.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't take place either. They were distant and like I say, minimally supportive. And I was trying to reason with them. And when I would try to reason, I was getting reactions. I was getting ultimatums. And of course, it started to, I started to steer away from my family,
Mm-hmm.
as a result of that. And then we had the neighbors in that, on the shore as well, and they reminded us of the stigma associated with mental illness every day. And it wasn't only the neighbors who were very cruel. It was, we had a church organization in the neighborhood where I actually went to school for a while. I was failing all my classes. So you have to remember, this is early 1970. So, I come from Los Angeles, which is, even back then was somewhat progressive, into Rhode Island that was, in my own opinion, very stale, certainly not as progressive as, California.
Mm-hmm.
And that church organization I was biased against because I was born out of wedlock. So I didn't make it in the school. I was failing all of my classes. And in fact, an incident took place in the school where the nun had stated that I was going to have to go kneel in the corner for the day and wear a dunce cap and, be receptive to her paddle.
Mm-hmm. I would assume that didn't go over too well.
No, it didn't. I left quite colorfully.
What grade was that?
Oh, geez, I couldn't even remember. Elementary,
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you. So I left there and I went home and I explained to my mom, what had happened with that particular incident. And she got on the telephone and gave the nun heck, and put me in public school after that, which to no surprise, my grades went up, A's and B's. I did very well.
You had mentioned, too, when you were in public school, you went to Kickamuit.
No.
Well, actually, you went to Warren High School, which
Warren
is
High
now Kickamuit Middle
Right.
School.
Right.
But you were mentioning that a couple of teachers in particular were very influential with you.
Yeah, I had Mrs. Fry, an English teacher. I was having some comprehension-related issues, while I was there, and she took me out of the class, actually, out of the English class, and put me in my own. And my responsibility was to read books on a daily basis to Cool Moose. I can't think of his name.
Robert Healy.
Robert Healy, a very, very intelligent, wonderful man, created very good habits. For me, if I got to a place, in the book where I didn't understand a word, he would have me open the dictionary and read it to him, or have me understand what the word meant and how to use it and so on and so forth. It created a very good habit, so in fact, I still do that today. So thank you, Robert, wherever you are. Mrs. Fry was just, she helped me to see something in myself. She had me write a short story. And I figured that the class, I was participating outside of the class, but it was a class project. And I figured everybody would do the ordinary, write my summer vacation, something of the sort. So I wrote a tragedy, which I ended up with an A+, I think, and she read it to the class. So she helped me to see that there were things, inside of myself that I wasn't quite paying attention to, and as a result of that, I really started to excel, so much so that I was being exempted from final exams. I had teachers coming and inviting me into their classes the following year. Please come and take algebra, so on and so forth. So it was quite a turnaround. I was a police officer in Warren, who is now a state detective, that would take the time to give me a little swift kick when I needed one, and remind me that maybe the paths that I was on at that time were not such good paths, that I was a wise kid, and so I had a lot of folks that along the way that were planting seeds of compassion and kindness that would come to fruition, later on in my life.
And these were seeds that were not coming from your own family. They were coming instead of your family. You were getting from outside resources,
Right.
but they were helping. Would it be correct to say they were helping with healing, in terms of the pain that you were going through and trauma? I would say, with having a mentally ill mother and a fairly negative family.
Well, I think that to whatever degree they recognized that I was a broken kid, and with that recognition, they did things that they thought were appropriate. They certainly, to me, I didn't really recognize, the healing factors right away. It would be later on in my life how appreciative, I was that, they took the time and they took the interest in me to help me along, so.
Now, you lived alone with your mother or other siblings? Were there other kids in the family?
No, I actually have, I lived alone with my mother. My grandmother was upstairs. I have 4 half-brothers in Canada that would come and visit occasionally, never stayed very long. And then, of course, there's the children on my father's side, some which were born later, but, I had lost touch with. There was no communication, really. In fact, it was my brother Christian was the most very heartbreaking, because I was never able to reconnect with him, so.
You had mentioned that when we talked prior that Christian at one point came to New England trying to reconnect with you and your mother. Is that?
My understanding is that Christian, my father had bought a house for him in New Hampshire, and either bought a house or rented a house, one or the other, and he was staying there. And yes, I've confirmed through three people that he was searching for my mother and I. Unfortunately, I guess he thought that we were in New Hampshire, and we weren't. We were in Rhode Island. By the time I found out that you know, he was in New Hampshire. It was far too late. You know, he had already returned to Los Angeles.
Okay. The other thing that you had mentioned is, I'm assuming after high school, there was an interest in philosophy and interest in just reading in general, that you became sort of a voracious reader. Was that part of the healing process for you also?
That's probably the number one. I had a very bad taste in my mouth for religion in general. In fact, I kind of back up and give you a little history around that.
It was organized religion you're talking about.
Organized religion, right? Yeah. I was actually, because of the bias that I felt, you know, or that I was exposed to, you know, in the church when I was a child. And actually, my mother was reaching out into, you know, various churches, you know, throughout the state, you know, to try and heal. And in, I believe it was 1974, 1975, I'm not quite sure if she's a Christian healer. Catherine Kuhlman came to the Providence Civic Center, where my mother wanted to go. She was going to do this big healing thing, you know. So me being around the age of 10 or 11, you know, I went to this thing, and I was watching people go up on this stage in, you know, wheelchairs, you know, and this woman would go over and put her hands on them and pray, and next thing you know, they were getting up out of the wheelchair. They were healed. It's pretty powerful for a kid, you know, to see. So my mother got in line, and I thought to myself, yeah, go for it, you know. I was very hopeful.
Wouldn't this be wonderful if?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she got up on the top of the stage, and there was this guy that would go and talk to Catherine, and then he would come back and he would talk with the person, and they would get together, they would pray, and that's kind of how the routine went. And the guy went over to Catherine, the guy came back, and my mother came down the stairs. They had rejected her. I'll never know the reason why. But they wouldn't take the time to pray for her. And that was a turning point for me. I took my mother by the hand and told her we were leaving.
So this was selective healing? They decided God just couldn't heal this woman?
Yeah, it really, I have to tell you, it shattered me. It shattered my opinion of religion, adults. You know, I would have to say that was really the point that I became very rebellious, and you know, I had a lot of deep-seated anger, you know, as a result of that. And you know, of course, it's a combination of the biases, the stigma, you know, the cruelty from those folks in the neighborhood. In fact, I asked myself this morning, you know, have you forgiven these folks? And you know, I couldn't even answer that question this morning. You know, I consider myself very compassionate. And maybe I just don't want to answer that question yet, you know, for myself.
Okay. So when did you had mentioned to me that your mother had ended up going to a nursing home, correct?
She did.
What was that? What got her there? What happened?
Well, because of her ADLs, her activities of daily living, you know, she couldn't do many of the things that she needed to do, you know, on her own. Of course, I was too young to care for her, you know, so I had to move on. You know, we were separated, and I don't remember particularly what age I was. It may have been 12, 13. I'm having a difficult time placing that time frame, but so she went into a nursing home where she got assistance, and she actually remained in nursing homes in Pawtucket for the remainder of her life.
Now, did you live with your grandmother at that point?
I did for a little while, but ultimately, you know, I wanted to get out of there. You know, I didn't. They were my family. You know, and I'm using the word family, but I certainly didn't feel that way. You know, I certainly didn't feel loved or respected. And you know, they literally perpetuated the issues with my mother, as far as I'm concerned. So I ended up staying with, folks actually up in Warren, family and friends.
Through your high school years?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, we've talked too, I mean, we talked a little bit about the reading that you've done and about the philosophy that you've aspired. It's many sort of an eclectic approach, I think, to the way you've looked at life since you started investigating spirituality, philosophy, things of that nature through your reading. Can you talk some about how that has helped you with your healing?
Absolutely. My mother had studied the philosophies of the East, and I know that my father had studied as well. And I poke around occasionally, but a friend of mine gave me this book, The Tao of Pu, which became a big catalyst for my studies. In fact, I'm going to read you this page. I could probably recite it because this is actually page 57 in the Tao of Pu. And I probably read it hundreds of times because it was a slap in the face for me. Let me read it. Everything has its own inner nature. Unlike other forms of life, though, people are easily led away from what's right for them because people have brain, and brain can be fooled. Inner nature, when relied upon, cannot be fooled, but many people do not look at it or listen to it and consequently do not understand themselves very much. Having little understanding of themselves, they have little respect for themselves and therefore are easily influenced by others. Mm-hmm. But rather than be carried along by the circumstances and behavior tendencies that we ignore, we can work with our own characteristics and be in control of our own lives. The way of self-reliance starts with recognizing who we are, what we've got to work with, and what works best for us. So, in some of the key points in this, and I didn't quite get it. That's why I kept, rereading it. Mm-hmm. And, later on in time, it started to sink in. But I focused on this. What is this inner nature, that they're talking about? And then, did I understand myself very much? Certainly not, because I was being ruled by my emotions. Mm-hmm. National Science Foundation states that the average mind can think up to 50,000 thoughts a day. And if that's true, I was up at the 50,000 level, certainly. And, so I would have these thoughts that would generate emotion. And of course, all these thoughts are with regard to my history. So, which promotes, it was generating more emotion, more thought. And I was like, and each time I have these thoughts, it was like a pinprick in an old wound, which was driving my anger, and so on and so forth. So, in any case, self-reliance, that paragraph just would not leave me alone, and propelled me into 7 years of study. I probably have 1,000 titles under my belt with regard to philosophy, other cultures. My mother wanted me studied in other cultures.
Native American also.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, when I was a child, my mother took me to a tribe in Los Angeles where I was prayed for that I would always be protected in my life, And certainly a very powerful prayer. Mm-hmm. I believe that prayer is what's carried me through, along with, I think that was a catalyst for many things in my life.
So would it be fair to say then that spirituality has been a tremendous healing agent? Not likened to what organized religion is, but true spirituality?
Yes, absolutely. I think that what worked for me with the philosophies of the East was that they said, come and take from us what we have to offer. Take the best parts of what you, in other words, what applies to you. Mm-hmm. And then go back. You don't have to stay. In other words, it didn't say to me things like, you were born a sinner. I wasn't born a sinner. So it gave me freedom to explore, you know. And it was a world that I wanted to live in, you know,
Okay.
that kind of a world. Yeah.
You know, when you think about all of the study that you've done, is there any particular philosophical backdrop that you would aspire to more than others, or is it truly eclectic?
Can you rephrase your question?
Well, you've mentioned Taoism as being something that you're interested in. You've mentioned Native American spirituality. Is it a combination of different philosophical backdrops, or is it one in particular that that you've aspired to?
Oh, clearly a combination. You know, in fact, I believe that all these different paths, if you will, all lead to the same place. I found similarity in just about every religion that I've touched upon, you know, which has also been healing, you know, in some respect.
Now, what's interesting about all of this is that here's a person who described yourself as being a broken person, who has gone through the process of healing through really educating yourself around different ways of looking at the world, different ways of interpreting what happened to you, and how you were able to put it into some kind of perspective so that you could move on. And now for the last several years, you've been helping others. You've been working with folks, and you've been helping them to get their needs met, to get themselves centered, to enhance the quality of their lives. Do you see a connection between the two, what the healing that you've done and what's brought you to Riverwood now?
I do. I can tell you that, you know, because I work for the Housing First Rhode Island program. And, you know, the philosophy behind the program is just to take people, you know, the homeless, you know, in some sense, the worst cases, you know, on the street, the co-occurring disorders, and put them into housing first. And we put them into housing with no, you have to do this, you know. In other words, no prerequisites to your housing. Because we know that just by putting them into housing, that they're going to benefit, you know, mentally, spiritually, you know, et cetera. But what works for me is that, you know, I was given a lot of ultimatums, you know, in my life. And every time I was given an ultimatum, I would burn the bridge, irregardless of the cost. Because I was sick of ultimatums, I needed reasoning, you know. And so if you take a look at the Housing First program, what we're doing is we're putting people into housing, no ultimatums, and we're saying, here are the supportive services that we have available for you, including a case manager, you know, guiding post, a light post. And the majority of them are taking advantage of that without any, you need to do this, you know, to get this.
Right.
And what does that say? It shows respect for the individual. Because if I give somebody an ultimatum, I'm no longer reasoning, I'm belittling, you know, that individual. I think it really is a model for society. You know.
Well, we've just been given the high sign. So we're going to need to stop for now, but what we're going to do is we're going to take this up again, and we'll talk more about how you've kind of connected between the Housing First model and your own philosophy and how that's been helping you in the healing process. And thank you very much for coming today.
Okay, it's my pleasure, James. Thank you.
Great to see you.